do something old and something new.
There we go.
The pheasant tail being old and Queen Banshee being something new. I'll do the PT first, and I'll demonstrate it first. But the pheasant tail, everybody thinks of the pheasant tail as Troth's pheasant tail with a peacock and everything in it. But actually the Sawyer's pheasant tail is the original. He was a river keeper on the River Avon in England from like 1928 till he died in the 80s. And he designed that fly for the mayfly hatches that he got there, the Betas and the there's PMDs and stuff. And there's no legs on these flies, and the reason why, because mayflies are swimmers. So when the nymphs swim, they just tuck their legs in. So this thing he's designed to like sight fish to fish, where he just drops in, and it cuts through the water real well, and it really imitates those insects pretty well. Now the original pattern was tied with no thread. He tied it with all copper wire and pheasant tail. That was it. And I've done them that way, and it's a real pain. It takes about, for a 16, it takes about 10 inches of wire, and because he uses the wire for the weight. He builds the thorax up with weight, and it's hard to get them the same every time for me. So I've kind of come up with a way where they look just like the original, but I use a little thread and I use a little lead, and that way I can get each fly comes out exactly the same weight with the same amount of wraps and stuff. So that's what I'm going to do. This is kind of one of my go-to flies for blue wing olive hatches and PMD hatches. And I tie them in regular ringneck pheasant in the brown, but I also tie them in dyed olive and dyed brown. When I do the Betas, I usually tie them in dyed brown with black thread, because the nymphs are usually pretty dark, and some of them I'll do with the olive. But we'll tie the standard one. The regular ringneck matches pale morning dun nymphs almost dead on. They're kind of a rusty brown color. So.
George, what size hooks do you tie it from?
You know, I use mostly 16s and 18s, and then I use a short shanked 18 that goes down like a 20. But 14 would be the biggest. I'm going to tie a 14 tonight so you can actually see what I'm doing. But 16s and 18s are pretty much what I use. So we'll start. And for a 16, or I guess I'll do this 14. For 14, I'm going to use 10 thousandths lead, which is like half amp lead, and it's going to take about 6 wraps of lead. On a 16, I'd use like 5 laps of lead. So I'm going to. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's good.
So I usually like to put my lead on first before I put my thread on. So I'm going to get my wraps of lead there. Absolutely, if you're going to use lead, it oxidizes, and what it does is it'll come through your dubbing or whatever. So you're going to want to put some kind of head cement on your lead. Okay.
The original fly was tied with no thread, okay? The
So
original fly was tied with no thread.
So I usually start my thread behind, and when I want to cover this lead as much as I can.
Yeah, he's got a little modification on it.
I want to cover this lead as much as I can, because as you're wrapping your hurl on there, sometimes it'll show through. So got that on there. And then I'd go ahead and coat that with head cement. And it's going to take, even with this, with using thread, it's going to take about 5 or 6 inches of wire to do this. I'm using some pretty fine copper wire here. The original wire came from like windings on electrical motors, and it was darker than this. It was kind of almost a burgundy color, and it's kind of hard to find that. So at this point, I'm going to take my wire and I'm going to tie it in right up against the lead. And come right about to the bend. And then I want a pheasant tail that's... I'm looking for the pheasant tail that's got a lot of red in it. You see that? And the center tails will have red on both sides. Whereas if you get a side feather, you only get the red on one side. But sometimes that's okay, because see, this one's pretty long, so that'll work. So I'm going to take, for this, I'm going to take about 5 or 6 fibers here. And there's one drawback to this fly is that the tails go in a few fish. I don't know what it is about pheasant tails, just not that strong, so I'll usually put a little extra fibers in there. So I've got my pheasant tail. I've evened the tips up before I cut it off. I want a reasonably short tail. I want a tail that's about half the shank length. So I'm going to kind of measure it. I'm going to take 2 wraps of thread to get it on there. I'm going to wind my thread forward. I'm going to cover up as much of this lead as I can. And we'll bring it up to the eye. And at this point, I would put head cement on all that on the hook. And I'm just going to wind this forward.
George, why don't you twist the hurl while you're wrapping it?
I think he is a
Leave
little
it
bit,
flat.
Gene.
Nah, I don't. Sometimes I do. You can. Sometimes I'll even use a mini hook and do that. But for this, I don't really have to. So I'm going to get here to the eye. I'm going to get a couple wraps right there. Bring my thread in front. And I'm just going to whip it off. And I'm going to cut it off. So I'm done with my thread. So now I'm going to take my copper wire and make one turn under the tail. I'm going to start wrapping forward here. I'm going to get...
You don't counter wrap it.
Not on this one, I don't, no. It's a little awkward to try to go that way, but you're going to see I'm going to have enough wire on here where it's not going to come apart. So when I get to the thorax, I'm going to go through the thorax 3 or 4 times, kind of on an angle like that. Then I'm going to cross back over in the opposite direction.
Okay.
And I'm going to end up right at the back of the thorax. Now the original pattern, he just pulled it over here, and that was the wing case. I end up at the eye, and you could just end it right here. I'm going to come here and make 2 wraps, and I'm going to come back through about 3 or 4 wraps, and I'm going to end at the eye. Then I'm going to pull the wing case back over.
That's cool.
I'm going to tie it down with 1 good wrap there, 2 wraps in front of the eye, and I'm going to take 2 more wraps going toward the back, and then at this point take my needle nose pliers
And just do a 1/2 inch?
no, I'm just going to break it off right there. Then I'm going to trim this, and then the key is a drop of super glue right to hold that, keep that wire from coming apart. And that's it. And that way I can make every fly tie is all the same weight. So if I lose one, the next one I know it's going to sink the same rate as the rest of them did. Sometimes I'll kind of kick the tail up.